Good afternoon, everyone. While the slides start showing up, um, thank you for the invitation to be here today, also on behalf of my colleague Orsi. So we come from the EU Policy Lab. We can move the slides, maybe Orsi. And what is the EU Policy Lab? Is both a JRC unit, and for the ones that are joining us from outside of the institutions, sorry in advance for using so much acronyms, but the JRC stands for the Joint Research Centre, which is the scientific service of the European Commission. So the EU Policy Lab is both a JRC unit that sits in the Innovation in Science and Policymaking Directorate, and beyond being a unit is also a real collaborative and experimental space for innovative policymaking. Actually, one of the few open floor rooms where we can develop workshops in a participatory way. Actually, in our lab, we orchestrate expertise of our colleagues through three main disciplines. Foresight, from where Orsi and I are coming from, is one of them, but we also have colleagues working on behavioral insights and design for policy. And all of these teams apply collaborative, systemic, and forward-looking approaches to help bring scientific knowledge of the Joint Research Centre into European Union policymaking. And we do that by facilitating collaboration between the policymakers, with the scientists, but also a vast variety of external stakeholders. Next slide, please. Inside of the Competence Centre on Foresight, Orsi and I, and together with other colleagues, namely Antonia Moak and Gwendolyn Bailey, we formed the Technology Foresight work stream. And if you're not familiar with this terminology of technology foresight, let me just give you a few concepts before we move forward. So technology foresight is a structure and systemic approach to explore the possible futures of science, technology, and innovation. So although we call it technology, we actually go beyond the technology itself, early on to the science that is behind it, and also the innovative applications and convergence of technologies into solutions. And we cover the full technology readiness level spectrum, so fundamental research to market deployment and scaling. We try to see scientific advances, technology developments, also in innovation systems. And we look into the future not only of the technologies and innovations, but also on their applications and also the contextual factors that are relevant for their development, uptake, and diffusion. So we also integrate beyond the technology dimensions, also societal, economic, environmental, and policy and political dimensions. We do that through many different methodologies. We'll speak about them briefly at the end of the presentation. But most of all, we do this, of course, to support a more future-oriented EU policymaking. So we try to identify these technologies and the future applications of them to strengthen awareness and preparedness and the strategic intelligence that is needed to make those future-oriented policies. We also do it to anticipate research and innovation needs, to inform regulation standards and governance frameworks. And in some projects, this becomes very tangible when we support also the prioritization of research development and innovation funding topics. One of the frequent questions is, what is the time horizon that we work for? And I would broadly describe as working on the mid to long-term future, which might span from 3 to 15 plus years. So it really depends on the domain and on the research question. But mostly we try to identify these early signals of change and emerging trajectories. In some projects, we try to explore also possible and plausible futures that often are still uncertain. But what we don't do is try to make projections and actually reduce the uncertainty. We like to explore uncertainty. But most of all, and that's the topic of today, we try to go beyond hype and short-term trends. And could you please move the slide? And that takes us to the question of why is it so important for this work to understand hype. First, what we understand by hype in this specific context. So in technology foresight, hype can be or can refer to a phase of inflated expectations or attention or even narratives surrounding a technology and innovation that extend actually the current maturity of that technology and its real-world capabilities, even the likely adoption, or even the demonstrated today, at least, the societal and economic impact that those technologies might bear. So why is it so important to understand? And we will, or she will guide you through several frameworks, mental frameworks that we can apply to understand questions of who benefits from and promotes certain narratives that we see today around technologies. To understand hype is also giving us tools to challenge underlying assumptions and expectations and some strategic interests. Also could give us the capability to distinguish between what is technically possible from what is still plausible or probable. And actually, plausible and probable are quite important in foresight to explore the uncertainty, but we should distinguish between what is already scientifically demonstrated, what is just a possibility, because hype tries to confuse them. It's also important to highlight risks, bottlenecks, and implementation barriers for those technologies. Hype also, understanding hype also avoids overlooking less visible and high important technologies. Sometimes we just focus on what is trending and we forget about other potential elements. But more than explaining here concepts, I think we should get moving with the exercise because nothing better than to practice our capacities to distinguish and to identify hype. And this is going to be almost a kind of a gym session to exercise our brains and our critical judgment for that. But over to Orsi.
Okay, so indeed, as João mentioned, this is a practical training session because we believe in learning by doing. So we will be using Slido. First of all, for a warm-up, but actually considering the weather, it should be a more of a cool-down activity. We will introduce you to 3 frameworks and 5 questions, but then really put these into practice and look into some specific technologies in AI and quantum and try to see if it's hype or if is there genuine impactful emerging technology behind. We selected AI and quantum because they are genuinely exciting new technologies. AI is everywhere. Quantum is still up and coming. So we have some really nice examples of airtime, of hype, but really truly impactful technologies too. So we will start with a couple of headlines. But first, what I promise you today is not too much theory, just 3 concepts, 5 questions, and at the end, I will invite you to try one thing this week. So let's look at the headlines. We will just look at them and without going into the theory, just trust our gut feeling on whether it's more of a hype or more of emerging, real impactful technology. In January 2026, Elon Musk predicted a popular podcast will hit AGI in 2026, and by 2030, AI will exceed the combined intelligence of humans. How likely is this prediction to come true? So you can take out your phones, you can scan the QR code, insert the number, or if you need the link, let us know in the chat and we can also provide you the link if you prefer to do it on a PC. Okay, I see that we have 2 solid contenders between possible and hype. But there is also quite a few people who think that this is rather likely or likely. Okay. I see one more participant ranking. serious doubts, but also an openness. Okay, next one, moving from AI to quantum technologies. Quantum computers will be able to break current internet encryption by 2027. Okay, I see that we have a very responsible crowd, always preparing.
And informed as well.
Okay. Again, bit of distribution, some doubts, but I think it's important to know that even if we don't believe that something is definitely going to happen, we still need to prepare for the longer term or even for unlikely events. Okay, moving on. An AI system has predicted the 3D structures of over 200 million proteins, covering nearly every known organism in Earth. So many of you will know that this mysterious AI system is in fact AlphaFold 2 to be precise. And I see that you have some doubts, but mostly real. Indeed, it is actually and may arguably one of the most exciting parts part of the use of AI, where it has definitely surpassed what human researchers could or were able to do. Okay. Next one, back to quantum computers. Quantum computers are revolutionizing drug discovery by simulating molecular interaction impossible for classical machines. Okay, I see a lot of optimism here. Yes, on this, there are some really important and promising elements, but there is definitely an exaggeration. And anytime you see the word revolutionizing, you should definitely have your red flag up. And the last one, don't think you can have a discussion on AI without covering AI agents. So AI agents are now autonomously running e-commerce businesses, writing complete code bases and managing investment portfolios. Again, a bit of a mix, but a solid majority is saying slightly exaggerated, but mostly real.
Just also FYI, Orsi, there is some movement also in the chat with people commenting on one of the previous questions. So while we wait for people to complete this, I can also read it out.
Could you do that, please? Thanks.
Yes. So there is Mathieu writing, we do not know all the organisms on Earth, let alone their proteins. And then Jörg writes, big difference between are and will be.
Indeed, indeed. And yeah, I think if we talk about all, it's always one of the phrases that should trigger your little red flags, because indeed covering all the organisms is absolutely impossible. And the big difference between are and will be is again noted, and in journalism, it's yeah, you often see that they are talking about an existing technology, but using a future task. Okay, back to AI agents. Indeed, AI agents are real and up and coming, but there are serious issues still, blips and errors. So to say that they are autonomously running e-commerce businesses is an exaggeration, but there are many real use cases in which AI agents work very well and very autonomously. Okay, thank you for this wonderful activity. So let's get a couple of, let's get a little bit of theory to tackle these use cases, and we will be coming back to these technologies for a deeper dive. So the first framework I wanted to show you is the Gartner hype cycle. It's a very well known, a big classic. New big technologies seem to follow the same roller coaster, and this is what's described in this hype cycle. There's a technology trigger for AI. There's this big moment, 2022, the 30th of November, release of ChatGPT. It's a big moment. It really, the application spread like wildfire, and it indeed led to inflated expectations. Then in the next year, 2 years, we've been going through a throw of disillusionment, realizing that hallucinations are a real issue, and even though we can tackle them in many ways, they persist. That the real life uptake, the uptake in business is much slower than expected. And it's a bit debated, but somehow we may be in the valley of disillusionment or coming onto the slope of enlightenment, better understanding how to use this technology, what's the right frame. And at one point, we reached the plateau of productivity, which is actually lower than the peak of inflated expectations, but it's a stable moment. I think it's also really important to note that as you are right after the technology trigger, going up to the peak of inflated expectations, it's an exponential curve. So at one point, you may think that, wow, this is going to continue, where you may actually be getting close to the peak, and that's the highest point that you will ever be. So that was the first framework. The second framework is more of a quote than an elaborate scientific framework, but still it's very powerful. So Roy Amara, a Stanford researcher, gave us one of the most elegant, simple, but valid insights to technology and forecasting its long-term impact. We consistently overestimate the impact of technology in the short run and underestimate it in the long run. If you think back on the internet in the 1990s, who are old enough to think back to the 1990s, it's been around for a couple of years. People started to have access consistently, but it didn't change a lot. And fast forward to now, where basically all the activities, the communication, the navigation, getting our food and getting our friendships, it's pretty much all online now. So overestimate in the short run, underestimate in the long run. And the same may be true with AI. We don't know how life will be in 20 years, but it can be fundamentally changed. And the last one, bringing in more the perspectives of policymakers and regulators, is the Collingridge dilemma, which is about our ability to shape, our ability to regulate technologies. So in the beginning of time, in the beginning of adoption, theoretically, our ability to regulate is quite high, except that we have very little knowledge and very little insights about what the technology is, how it can be regulated, and what would be an impact. And as time progresses, as the technology is adopted, we get more and more insight. But then the technology is being adopted. There are use cases that have spread, that are widely accepted, that are difficult to change. So as our knowledge of impact grows, as evidence accumulates, our ability to regulate the technology actually decreases. So it takes us to this dilemma: when we can act, we don't know enough, and when we know enough, we cannot act. And I think one very good example of this is the AI Act. And if you think back of the timeline, the first draft of the Act was written before the big ChatGPT moment in 2022, before the boom of large language models, before large language models were a thing. And so as the negotiations were progressing, quite a few things have to be revised, but it's also a good example of how technology can change so quickly and so profoundly that the full legislative cycle, which can take easily 10 to 15 years from the first idea to the implementation of the regulation, just cannot keep up with the new technologies. Okay, so that was my 3 frameworks. Now let's see the 3 questions before we dive deeper into the technologies. So the questions that you should pose to yourself is: who benefits if I believe it? What's the narrow claim versus the broad implication? What is it that the press release, that the news item says actually happened? And what is the broader speculative claim that will or would happen in the future? What's the gap between the demo and the deployment? What are the circumstances in which the demonstration took place? Is it in the laboratory? How controlled? What's the scale? And what would be the eventual deployment? What's the size of the gap between the two? What's the time horizon? And who is not saying this? Is it and very importantly, do researchers talk about this, or is it only the company? So equally important is to look at who is making the claim, but also who is not making the claim. Okay, let's go back then to some of the technologies. And quantum computers was a topic in one of our warm-up questions. So let's look at this. And I will read up the little news item, and I have the 5 questions here. And please indicate which are the questions where you actually have a little red flag, where you have a doubt, where you say, I might think that there is something going on here. So signal, yeah, I think you have the idea. Whenever you think that this is an issue in this news items, signal it. So Microsoft presented Majorana as the world's first quantum processor powered by topological qubits, projecting that by 2029, quantum systems would run calculations that classical machines cannot. Majorana is a single prototype with limited number of qubits. So indeed, a big issue is the demo versus deployment gap. This is the major issue with quantum computing. We are working, the working prototypes have a very limited number of qubits, and they need very particular circumstances to function, because these qubits are very, very sensitive to heat and any type of radiation. Who benefits? I think when it says that Microsoft presented their own computer, that's always a little red flag. If it's the company's own press release, surely they know the most, but they also have the strongest interest. The time horizon, and one more thing with the time horizon is that if you read the same news with the time horizon that continues to extend and extend, that's a bit of a red flag. Narrow versus broad claim, running calculations that classical machines cannot. Yes, it can be something very specific, or it can be all calculations that classical machines cannot. And who is not saying this? Of course, this is a short bit, but In the domain of research, topological qubits have been around for quite a long time without really causing any breakthroughs so far. But I stop here and just to see if there's any comment on the chat, and maybe if you want, João, if you have any thoughts, anything to add on this.
Yeah, indeed, quantum computing is one of those examples where, although there's some grounding for the expectations that we might have for their usefulness in some areas, it's often mixed with an overpromise, so to say, that it will completely replace classical machines. I mean, it might be able to, and that's what, when you dive into it, and that you see that probably very specific needs might benefit from quantum computing, but the promise has been around for a while now. So we have also to understand, I mean, that helps us to also see the contextual factors that need to be put in place, and the significant R&D investments until something that is matching the promise still needs to be put in place. So very much connected with the demo versus deployment gap and the time horizon and whose time horizon. Not so much here on the who benefits, although there's of course interests by certain groups to continue to keep quantum in a way hyped, and that's also something that we should debunk. I mean, if it's not delivering as fast as we were promised? I mean, who also benefits from this? So just some of the examples of the analysis that we actually have heard in workshops that we run, coming out of experts that at the same time are experts on the field, but that allows us to debunk some of the more mainstream media attention to it. And we'll talk about this expertise-based assessments, which is a key also to debunk a little bit hype further down the presentation.
And maybe just one point on quantum. There are a lot of news on quantum computing. It's often the hype. There's a really big gap between demo and deployment, as you have very, very well said. But there are some quantum technologies that are much more mature, especially in sensing or communications. But atomic clocks, or MRI, which have been around, technically they are also quantum computing. So to say that quantum is a technology, that's not yet, that's not true, because there are already well-established technologies based on the phenomena of quantum physics. But quantum computing is one that's still a bit in the future. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is the one that we started with. Musk predicted that AGI will arrive in 2026, surpassing the combined intelligence of all humanity by 2030. This supersonic tsunami will drive humanity towards radical abundance. In early 2025, he predicted AGI by 2025. In 2024, predicted 2024. So, who benefits? Narrow versus broad claim, demo versus deployment gap, and who's not saying this? This is a bit more pedagogical because we already included some of the key concepts in the answers. Indeed, the who benefits question is a classic Musk runs XAI, important shareholder. The narrow versus broad claim, AGI is not defined. If you put 20 researchers, believers on AGI, they will give you 25 definitions. So it's really difficult to claim that something will arrive in such a specific time frame if we don't know what that something is, and also how you measure. The time horizon, I think with AGI, we always see that it's just around the corner, just around the corner. We need to invest quickly now a lot and put off the regulation because AGI is really around the corner. So that's a red flag here. And who is not talking about AGI? And of course, the demo versus deployment gap. In this case, since we are lacking the definition and lacking an understanding of the mechanism of AGI, that's not the most relevant. The most relevant is indeed the benefit and the claim itself.
And indeed, we see here that often the personality or the institution that is transmitting the information already gives a little bit of credibility or lack of credibility. So it's one of the signs of hype, and it doesn't surprise that you all or the majority of you selects the first question because there's a specific actor which we know might benefit financially by just the impact of the declaration. So it's not that it is something that it's impossible to actually we achieve, but on the lack of concepts on still the maturity of the technology and what is needed to reach there, we have serious doubts that it's going to come as soon as this person says. So the first question is quite immediate and very much connected with certain personalities that use this kind of strategy for, I would say, more immediate financial benefits or media attention than to actually announce something that is just coming.
Yeah, and I think on this, we can also mention that we should separate AGI as an emerging technology or AGI as a cultural phenomena that inspires and moves people. So as a technology, it's not defined, it's not measurable, it's too fluffy to be called an actual technology, but as a cultural phenomena, it's very powerful and it's something that exists. So it's not to say that it's a concept that doesn't exist, it's just that it's not a well-defined impactful technology. Okay, I see that you are doing great, so I hope you're up for the challenge, because in the next one, I just show you the text and I invite you to type in any red flags that you see. So May 2026, quite recent, Isomorphic Labs, that's a DeepMind spin-off, raised $2.1 billion and started human trials for AI-designed cancer drugs. The narrative, AI and quantum will revolutionize drug discovery. Reality, trials still take a decade and cost billions per drugs. Which red flags do you see? Yeah, that's very right. There is a huge gap between demo and deployment here, and part of the gap is the very rigorous and rightly rigorous trials that have to happen between the discovery of the drug and using it on humans at a large scale. Yes, indeed, the word revolutionize is always a red flag. AI designed, no time horizon, indeed, benefits revolutionize. Yeah. Having said that, pharma, as we saw with protein folding and drug discovery, is actually one of the areas where AI is already having a demonstrated positive impact. So it's important to see that just because you have some red flags and just because you have some very, very valid red flags, it can still be a promising area where there are emerging technologies. Yeah. Interesting. Somebody mentioned hallucinations. I do wonder for drug discovery, I'm not even sure that hallucinations are such a negative thing. I mean, obviously, then you have to rigorously test the safety and the efficacy of the pharmaceuticals, but maybe for the discovery phase, an out-of-the-box hallucinatory thinking could actually be helpful.
It's very interesting that the word revolutionize is actually a red flag and just an anecdotal situation. In our team, we use, of course, AI-enhanced processes to detect signals and trends of change, and we use it to summarize the credible sources that we have selected. And over time, we saw that the LLMs use quite frequently the revolutionize word, which we identify as a phenomenon that was designed in LLMs to hype the things that it was encountering when you ask it for help regarding technology for such. So we had to craft our prompts to have a careful analysis of the signals it set. So some of the concepts that you were actually discussing here, we had to encode it in the prompts that we used to analyze and summarize some of these signals to avoid exactly the hype phenomenon on the analysis. And the word revolutionize was something that we actually had to forbid the LLM to use because it was constantly over-promising that certain technologies would revolutionize certain fields.
Okay, thank you very much for your activity and your insights. You absolutely aced this questionnaire. And so just to recap this section, I'd like to remind you of the three frames that we talked about: the Gartner hype cycle, the very well-known roller coaster of visibility over time. If you remember one thing, my subjective recommendation would be the quote by Roy Amara that we overestimate the impact of technology in the short run and underestimate in the long run. And as many of us have interest in regulation and policy making, the Collingwood dilemma about our ability to regulate and our knowledge to regulate is an interesting one. And the red flags, I think you've already mastered them. And to take these findings to a bit more broader context and to understand our technology foresight practices, I hand over to João to talk a few minutes about what we do and how we do it.
So for the ones who are already familiar with Foresight, and even if you aren't, I'm going to establish here a connection between the importance of debunking hype or understanding how to spot it and how to analyze the increasing amount of information on technology development that we capture and how to use it in a forward-looking exercise such as a tech foresight exercise. And actually hype is quite important across many different methodologies that we use in slightly different ways. One of the methodologies that is often used in foresight and tech foresight is scenario building, where we develop different alternative stories about how the future could evolve under changing conditions and also uncertainties. Probably you have seen scenario exercises. They aim to be thought provocative and they aim to challenge our assumptions, which can sometimes be confused with hype. So not because we craft a scenario that is in our understanding unlikely, it sometimes be confused with hype. But it's where we use interdisciplinary expertise to craft those scenarios that we are able to distinguish between what is just a provocative but still plausible future from what could be an unrealistic speculation, mostly in what concerns, for instance, the time horizon. As you know, scenarios also have a time horizon to develop. One of the frequent methodologies that Orsi and I use are horizon scanning, so where we systematically search for this news, these early signals of important changes on emerging technologies and innovations, and where we also analyze the contextual factors that shape their development and uptake. And this horizon scanning is often a hype debunking exercise that requires domain expertise to distinguish between what could be meaningful short, mid, or long-term shifts from what is simply media attention inflation or inflated expectations and narratives that come from specific interests. Another methodology that we use are Delphi surveys. So basically, they are surveys with different rounds of consultation and interaction that could assess, for instance, the time to impact and the size of the impact of certain technologies. And in these surveys, experts, again, and their expert judgment, but also the exchanges that participants in surveys have, where they critically assess the assumptions of each other, and they kind of try to converge on an assumption, are quite important to debunk the hype. So if there is something that we could say around the importance of hype on just these three examples of methodologies, that they rely on a participatory sense-making processes, and beyond being important that we are able to, as non-experts, to debunk these hypes. So it starts as an individual analytical exercise. It becomes significantly stronger through a collective reflection where we can exchange ideas. Why do you think this is hype? Or maybe what is the truth behind this that could be actually taking this technology further or sooner than we expect? So different expertise, different perspectives and backgrounds help us challenge these assumptions, identify blind spots, but also debunk the myth. So if I could summarize this, debunking myth is as important as an individual exercise that we all do when we see news, but also it's quite important when we developed participatory and collective exercises to analyze the future technologies. Over to you, Orsi. You're muted.
Thanks. So as we are coming to the end, I told you that I would give you one thing to try this week, and it is the following. Next time you see a news item with a sense of urgency, revolutionizing, just take a minute, take a breath and think a little bit. Go through the three framework, go through the question, who benefits, the time frame, the gap between deployment and reality, the exact nature of the claim, and just have a calm thought about it. It's a bit like all the cybersecurity exercises. Whenever you feel the sense of urgency, that's exactly the moment to take a breath and have a calm and critical moment to think about it. And with this, I think we are ready to conclude. We have some time for questions and maybe for the iLab colleagues to close. But before so, I would like to show you our contacts. You can reach us through this email. We have a newsletter. We promise we don't spam you often. It's bi-monthly, quarterly, very well curated content. So thank you for your attention and your active participation. And we have some time for questions and some time for the iLab colleagues.
Thank you so much, to both of you, for the great presentation. The participants or the audience, you can write your questions in the chat or raise your hand, either way, and we can unmute you. Okay.
Yeah. If you maybe came across a technology that you suspected is a big hype recently, we would be interested to hear that too. If you have some doubts whether something is a hype or not, if this is a topic that comes up to your work in your private life, we are interested in many things.
Maybe a warm-up question from my side. What would be the technology that is currently like maybe too overhyped the most, in your opinion?
Well, I really think it has to be AI, but with the understanding that we expect too much in the short term and too little in the long term. I do feel that not only are we in this valley of disillusionment, but there is also an active pushback. And many people, if they see an AI-generated text, especially an AI-generated image, me included, I'm a big fan of AI, but I still have this gut feeling about it. So it's a disillusionment, but there is an active pushback and societal concerns. And I also think that it has become often a marketing term. So, but its impact, especially in the long run, will be absolutely profound. I don't know, João, if you have another example.
No, I would agree with you on that, and also looking on the questions that in the meantime are popping up on the chat. Martin asks about what about fusion and small modular reactors, and I would say from the knowledge that I have, indeed fusion had a higher hype process in the recent past. But it's a technology that have been promising clean and almost endless energy for a while now. It's also one interesting area to go back to the Gartner hype of cycle and understand that when it was extremely hyped, we might, maybe with a few, with the exception of a few experts, we might not have understood as a general public, there's so much research and innovation, including on the enabling technologies that are needed to make fusion energy a reality. And what we see in our horizon scanning process as innovations, for instance, in the advanced materials that are needed to make fusion a reality, have been steadily improving. So I believe that right now we might be on the valley of disillusion on fusion, but we might soon evolve into the plateau where incremental innovations in enabling areas will allow this to be a reality. I wouldn't risk to say if it's 5 or 10 years, but I would say that one day it will be a reality. Regarding small modular reactors, that's something where the hype is more recent. We have quite some fans across the Joint Research Centre on the solutions and quite some initiatives of the Commission as well. It is, again, I think going back to the questions that Orsi introduced, it's more a question between the demonstration and then the deployment. We talk about small modular reactors with just a handful of cases worldwide, if I'm not mistaken, in place. So if in theory it will be a solution for a few application cases, it's certainly not a solution for a lot of other use cases, and it still has to demonstrate if it can be scaled up and if the time for manufacturing and other elements are a reality. Yeah, and I'll stop here. Maybe Orsi would like to take the data centers in space, which is also a very overhyped phenomenon, as Amelie suggested.
Yes, just before that, I wanted to make the point that OpenClaw is also a good example of the gap between demonstration and the broad-scale feasible implementation. There have been some really interesting activities done by agents, but we also see agents deleting code, deleting data sets, exposing credit card information, exposing API information. So there are some really interesting little demonstrations, but it's quite far from where, people, as in general public, would trust agents with their credit card or personal information, or whole businesses would be able to build just on agent activity. Having said that, small specific business processes can really easily be automated with agents. And on data centers in space, absolutely overhype, but I think it's also interesting to see how much of the power of our fantasy and the power of narratives. mean, data centers are a real issue, and as I mentioned, in many ways they become to symbolize AI implementations in a very physical form. But just imagining that we could, move them to space, there is something very sci-fi about that. So especially in AI, you see that a lot of the hype, a lot of the imagination is generated by sci-fi narratives, less so than actual technologies and existing deployments or discoveries. So absolutely overhyped, but I have to say that I'm a fan of sci-fi, so I have a little sympathy for why is it overhyped. Professionally not, but as a person, yes.
And just to build up here on some questions that Marek was saying about our horizon scanning process. So it's a continuous process, as Orsi already clarified. And sometimes, as Orsi also mentioned, we deep dive in certain areas with the help of field experts. We capture quite a few hundred of news and scientific publications daily, but we use an AI enhanced process to filter out a lot of that information. So a significant part of that information is left out, either because it's hyped in a way or there's a lack of novelty. But and that raises two things. If you use AI with this, you have to really craft the prompt to distinguish these kind of things through qualitative and quantitative analysis, while still leaving some space for humans with some sort of expertise to actually make a final judgment if something is a really an interesting signal.
Yeah, and I think we are coming to the end, but maybe we can close with the million-dollar question by Ivana. How can we assure as a society that technology is used in a positive way? If only we knew. But I think it's also interesting to look back that some of the transformational technologies had a really rough ride in the beginning. If you think back on printing books, one of the first books that was printed in large quantities was a book that fueled witch hunting. If you think back in the beginning, the Industrial Revolution, the conditions that workers experienced that worked in the factories, or even when electricity was introduced and there was little understanding about how it should be used and insulated, there were a lot of fires. So I do think that there is a learning curve for the society to use a technology. And in the beginning, we can have quite a few adverse incidents, and how we can assure that would be definitely worth another discussion.
All right, thank you so much. Let's use the last minute to quickly share our upcoming events. Wait a minute. So, and thanks for everyone who is participating until now. So a quick outro is we have also upcoming events similar to this on the 1st of July and the 16th of September. Both of these events are open to the public. So everyone who is here as attendees can also participate here. We will send the link out to this afterwards, together with the recording. And furthermore, for everyone who's working within the commission, we have also several events coming up. Also a short teaser. We have internal talks on crypto markets, EU digital wallet, and the observatory. And also some trainings regarding the Innovators Playbook and the light governance process. So I quickly push through it because I feel like we are at the end now. But thank you again, Orsi and João, for the very nice presentation. And I feel like we all have great insights in how to think critically about news now.
Okay. Many, many thanks to all, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you, everybody, for the participation. See you at one of our next events. Thanks again to our speakers for being here, and have a lovely afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.